Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. It's terrific to be here. Thank you for joining us. And let me thank our panelists for coming. We have a remarkably distinguished panel with a very diverse set of backgrounds. And we plan a conversation around the state of the private markets at the moment across the United States and India, as well as a conversation about how to build a great company. So those are broad topics, but we'll try to make some headway in them. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A, so if you want to start thinking about that. I'll give it just a 15-second introduction and then start by asking our panelists each to do that so you have a better sense of who's up here this afternoon, and maybe that'll help frame some questions. So my name's Toby Stuart. I'm the faculty director of the Entrepreneurship Center here at Berkeley-Haas. I'm also the faculty director of what we call the Institute for Business Innovation. Much of my research career has looked at entrepreneurship in the tech sector, and I kick around it in this valley in many different capacities. So that's how I managed to get up here today. BB, if we could maybe start with you.
Yeah. Good afternoon. You're all awake? The tea hasn't arrived yet. The pakoda hasn't arrived yet. I just went to see if the tea has arrived. I guess all of you have to wait until this panel gets over. So thank you so much for putting together this wonderful panel and the wonderful event today. It's been a terrific learning for us as well. So my name is Jagadeesh, and I've been in this country for the last 36 years. And my entrepreneurial journey started back in 1993, when myself and a partner of mine, KB Chandrasekhar, started our first company called Exodus Communications, which pioneered the concept of internet data centers.
First Indian unicorn.
First Indian unicorn, yes, thank you. Took the company public in 1998, and we had a market cap of $27 billion at its peak. And given the importance of the company, we were actually considered as a national asset by the White House back in 99, 2000, because of the kind of customers that we had across all our data centers. And then I started my next company called NetScaler, which was to solve some scaling problems that we were facing at internet. We created a technology that helped to scale the internet, company called NetScaler, and we went through, as you all know, there was a lot of ups and downs after the dot-com burst. And so we did well after going through some downturns. We made appropriate changes, and in 2005, the company was very successfully sold to Citrix, and I was with Citrix for a bunch of years. And then since then, I've been focusing primarily in investing in early stage startup companies. And during this course of time, given the fact that I also have lots of interest in India, I embarked on two different paths. One was to fund some exciting companies, especially given all the talks that is going on today about the digitization aspect of it. So I funded a company called NetMagic, which was once again to bring the internet to corporations. So NetMagic was the very early pioneer of internet data centers in India, which is sort of like what we did at Exodus, but we did that in India, but lots of challenges in India, but we managed to overcome that. And I also funded another company called EduRite, which actually brought education software, and it actually became like a de facto standard between K1 and 12. And a lot of these classrooms became these smart classrooms. And for a smart classroom, this EduRite technology, which brings education to be taught at a very simplistic level to the K1 to 12. So that company also was acquired by Pearson's, and Pearson's managed to actually scale EduRite to the masses much later. And today, I focus primarily in angel investments And 60% of my time I spend on capitalistic opportunities, and 40% of my time I spend on socialistic, social impact kind of opportunities. So I work in many nonprofit areas focusing on education, healthcare, and water-related activities. And as Mohan was asking me in the morning, that I should bring the technology to India, and I did. Whatever I could, I actually did. And in fact, to Punita Reddy, who talked about telemedicine, in fact, we funded a company back in 1999-2000, company called TeleVital, which is very widely used today in India to bring telemedicine to the rural by connecting lots of super specialty hospitals, especially the government hospitals. So this is very widely used with the partnership of ISRO. Given the fact that India did not have good communications, we used ISRO's satellite connectivity to connect thousands of villages into super specialty hospitals across the whole nation. And this technology was has been very widely used, and I'm actually very proud to say that, the usage of this is increasing every day, and lots of lives have been saved using this whole telemedicine technology, bringing this digitization concept. So life is pretty exciting, and lots of challenges. India is not as smooth as we all think. But we cannot stop just because it's not smooth. So we continue to do our work, continue to bring both entrepreneurship, because that's very important to create the jobs, and social impact, because that's very important to help eliminate the poverty. And that's the charter in which I'm working now. Thank you.
Following B.V. Jagadeesh is always a hard challenge. And plus my resume is not as impressive as his, so I'll keep it brief. I used to be a serial entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, and I had some successes and some, what we call in Silicon Valley, valuable learning experiences. And the last one I did as a CEO was that. So then I said, okay, I'm not going to do anything. 18 months, I'll just sit home and meditate. I got bored very quickly, so I started this angel investor group called Thai Angels, which did very well. I liked it so much that I, started my own venture fund called Monta Vista Capital. And along the way, I think the most memorable thing I did, two things actually. One is to become president of Thai, and we invited Prime Minister Modi to come here, and we were able to, engage him enough that he got us involved in drafting the Startup India policy, and that's very satisfying. Of an interaction with the government where they actually listened to you and actually implemented some of your ideas. So that was very satisfying. Along the way, I think BV and I launched a program about 4 years ago in India called $1 Billion Babies. And the whole idea was to pick 3 or 4 startups from India every year, the most promising startups, and expose them to our networks in Silicon Valley and beyond, and to accelerate their success into $1 billion valuation. So that thing, you see, has evolved. It's become Startup Bridge India now, where we get 25 startups from India every year and introduce them to big companies in US. So that has been a very, very satisfying part. The other connection to India has been that I've been involved with a nonprofit called Foundation for Excellence. We give scholarships to extremely talented kids in India who are extremely poor, kids of maid servants, street vendors, and things like that. 18,000 of them so far we have funded, who are talented enough to get into an IIT, NIT, or a middle college or something like that. I was very, happy to meet one of those students here who is doing PhD in electrical engineering here, one of those kids. Is he here still?
No, he's off.
He's off, okay, he went back. Okay. He went back to write his paper, okay. And a lot of people here are supporters of that. And in fact, Mohan Daspai, he spots a good idea and he supports it. So he's one of those ideas that he has supported. So we have a lot of passion, you see, about this cross-border entrepreneurship, and some ideas is here and what's holding back more.
All right, thank you. Ajeet?
Take this.
Yeah, just pass it.
Okay. Is it working?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, hi, my name is Ajeet Singh. I'm a co-founder and exec chairman at ThoughtSpot. I'm pretty confident that this is probably going to be the most disappointing session of the whole day. Because the topic is how to spot a unicorn. So if you came here thinking that you learn some magic formula and then go invest in companies that become unicorn, that's not going to happen. So apologies for disappointment. So my background, first 10 years of my life, I worked in large companies in India, actually, till 2006. And I came to the Valley in 2007 to work for Oracle. I could do that only for 9 months, because when I worked in large companies, I was most interested in building new things, new products. And when I came to the Valley, I was like, I couldn't be in the Valley and not do startups. So I joined a company called Astra Data Systems, where I ran product management. From there, with two other partners from Astra Data, started a company called Nutanix, which has done pretty well. I was a co-founder and chief products officer there. In 2012, I started ThoughtSpot, my second company, which is also a unicorn. So I've been extremely, extremely fortunate to have co-founded 2 unicorns. And I can tell you that there is no way to spot one early. If you went to our first office in Nutanix, actually many candidates used to come, and then they would never respond to our emails. It was so bad. So we started doing interviews in Starbucks. We would not even invite them to our office for interviews. So there is absolutely no secret formula.
Maybe one of the best way to spot a unicorn is to clone you.
That's also not going to work. In fact, another interesting trivia. So our second office was slightly better, and I believe that was an office where Exodus was.
That's where I met you guys.
And it had some relationship with Exodus also was there. Yes. It was a small suite in Santa Clara for about 25 people.
Yeah. Nutanix, when I got involved with Nutanix back in 2011, I think. That is when you guys were in this Santa Clara Mission Center. Yeah. And they happened to be in the same suite where Exodus was.
Yeah.
And then when I told the CEO, he went and announced to the whole company. And so if any of you want, what is the suite number, come and talk to me.
It's 215.
All right, Anil?
Yeah, I think speaking of offices, even the office which I had for my startup was so bad that there used to be 2 dogs who used to scare away everybody who came, and it was all terribly carpeted, so we would also take people out to Starbucks to interview. But yeah, I came here into Silicon Valley 27 years ago to do my PhD at Stanford, and Silicon Valley has changed, but so has India over the last 27 years. It has really transformed itself. I've been doing startups for most of my career since I finished my PhD. My first one was during the .com boom in the e-commerce comparison shopping space. We went through the whole boom and bust cycle, and eventually we were acquired, which happened after the bust. So having gone through the bust, we learned a lot of good lessons coming out of it. After that, I started my second company, which was in the ad tech space. We grew it to manage about $2 billion of ad spend, and were acquired by Adobe, and I've been with Adobe since then for the last 6 years. So from my experience at Adobe, I'm seeing a lot of the unicorns coming to us as well, and the valuations that we see for companies that we acquire have steadily gone up over the last 5 or 6 years that we have been now making acquisitions in this space. I'm also involved with Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs, which is alumni association of Stanford that invests in young startups. And in the course of that, I've invested in a couple of companies, one in the India context, one of them with Venk, which provides content over WhatsApp to Indian people for whom internet is the WhatsApp in many cases.
Is an antidote to fake news.
Yes. And the other startup was more of a company which started in India but moved to the US to sell to US companies, which is, I guess, a new trend that we are seeing called Hypertrack. It's a very interesting thing which I'm seeing with Indian companies. They are not limiting themselves to the Indian marketplace, but seeing the worldwide market as an opportunity to grow. So with that.
So thank you for the introductions, and you can all see what a remarkable panel we have. I sort of thought we had it split up between the investors and the entrepreneurs, but it turns out the investors were entrepreneurs before they became investors.
That's
so
a good sign.
Yeah, so we have a rich array of experience here. Ajeet's already ruled out half the panel, which was going to be about how you spot a unicorn as being a unicorn-like task that we will not succeed at. The second half of our mandate, which maybe we'll spend a minute on, to get started, is the state of the markets, and maybe like the other panels that have happened, we'll dance across continents because markets aren't necessarily globally correlated. And let me start off with a position on that, and then ask the panel to react to it. So I think somebody sent me an article. It was a link to an SF Gate article, and if I read it correctly, median house prices in San Francisco in the first half of 2018 accelerated in percentage and absolute terms more than any other ever historic measured change in the heat of a housing market. Which I took to be a sign of the time. So let me start off with the blanket assertion, which is the private tech markets on the investor side have never been more expensive than they are right now.
Can I take that?
Yes, please.
So I've been investing in real early stage for the last 10 years now actively. I see absolutely no inflation at early stage. I've been investing, you see, at companies which I valued less than 8 million in 2010, and I continue to invest in companies that are valued less than 10. All the inflation that is taking place is, at Series B and beyond, sometimes Series A also. So that's when the risk is taken out, the product market fit is there, the critical mass is there, and that's when you see, the Goldman Sachs and SoftBanks and Morgan Stanleys and Fidelities are willing to put a huge amount of money, which is raising this thing sky high. But at the early stage, that's where there is absolutely no change in valuation from 10 years ago.
Huh.
But, it depends on the pedigree, depends on the credentials of the entrepreneurs. Because I've actually seen some of the VCs who never gave more than a $10 million pre-money. I've actually seen these people giving more than $25 to $30 million pre-money because they don't want to lose out on good opportunities, right? Against spotting a unicorn. So if you look at the pedigree of some of these entrepreneurs, the background and what they have done and so on and so forth, the last thing you want to do is to lose out, because ultimately if you actually do the math, if that entrepreneur truly builds a $1 billion value, then what you're giving up in the early stages is actually not much. You can still make a big cut out of it.
I shouldn't have made the blanket statement. I have made some exceptions.
Yes.
And one of them is sitting here in the audience. Yes.
Yeah, I'll give you an entrepreneur's view on this because I'm not still a bona fide investor, unlike my fellow panelists. So I look at valuations as something that is relevant point in time, but when you're building a company, unless you are starting with the mentality of I'm going to build it and sell it, and there is a finite window of time that you need to do that in. If you take a 10-year view of a startup, you are going to go through some macro cycles. You will raise certain rounds on higher than right valuations, and assuming there is such a thing as a right valuation, and you will raise certain rounds at lower valuations. So at ThoughtSpot, we did our Series C in March of 2016, and the day I started fundraising was the day when Tableau and LinkedIn were cut in half, and we play in Tableau space. And it was, we still managed to raise a great round. It was probably 20–30% lower than what we would have gotten in an up market, but who cares? You know, if you're building something for the long term, it doesn't really matter. Are the markets heated up right now? Definitely. There is both private and public markets are up. And I look at this as there is the intrinsic value of a startup, and there is also demand supply. So there is definitely a lot more demand for investing in tech companies in particular, because the world is digitizing, and if you looked at the whole world as a portfolio, that portfolio is shifting from traditional investments like cement factories and manufacturing to more towards technology. So that demand and supply is creating higher valuations. But as an entrepreneur, I also know that when you're looking to hire engineers, they're also 20, 30, 40% higher than what I saw when I did my first company, Nutanix. We started in 2009. That was on the back of the worst economic cycle that we had seen in a long time. And ability to attract talent and what you had to pay for talent was very different than what we have to do now. We are competing with people that can walk into Facebook and Google, 5 to 6 years of experience out of a great college, and they can get $500,000.
You couldn't convince them to take ThoughtSpot stocks?
No, we do. That's why we are building the company. We are. But I'm saying that raising money, it might seem that it is easier, but everything after that is harder. You're competing for more talent, you're paying more, office rents are higher, everything is higher after that. So end of the day, these things normalize out, and as an entrepreneur, I don't really care of the valuation that you might hit in a certain round.
Yeah, I guess everything is relative. I mean, during the dot-com boom, it was very easy to raise money, and the valuations were much higher. And then we had sort of the whole boom-bust cycle. And now I think there is a Series A crunch. You have a lot of money going into seed stage companies where it's easy to raise money at somewhat decent valuations, but there are so many such seed-funded companies now available for the Series A venture capitalists that they tend to pick the best of the lot, and they are, of course, willing to pay a lot more at that time. But they get to pick from a pretty mature seed stage companies and the best seed stage companies that are out there available. And I agree with what Ajeet said as well, which is there is, in some sense, it's easy to start a company with easy cloud computing and capital access being easier. But getting talent is very, very expensive. I mean, you're competing with the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, especially in Silicon Valley. And to get good talent, you have to pay top dollars. So that's become the bigger crunch point in terms of starting a new good company.
Okay, so let me quickly comment, and then maybe we'll shift gears a little bit. So I can remember. So it's funny you say you pay 8 or 10 on the seed stage. So the first class I ever taught after moving to Berkeley, and this was maybe 8 years ago, I invited one of the legendary seed investors in the Valley in to speak to my students, and I can remember he addressed my class, opening it up by saying, 2.5 is the new 2. And we all looked at him like, well, you know, what the hell does that? There must be wisdom in this. And he then went on to say that had I have come here 6 months ago, all the deals I was doing at 2, and now all the deals I'm doing at 2.5. So this is one of the $50,000, $100,000 checks. But remember the days just a few years ago when the seed deals were actually much, much, much less expensive than they are now. But if we go off of what BV alluded to and Ajeet said, so the cost of labor has increased by 30%. By my reckoning, the cost of space has increased by even more than 30%. I mean, that seems to be the annual increase in the cost of space. There's 0% unemployment in the sectors in which we're recruiting into these organizations. The salaries that the kids are getting when they graduate from, even the summer salaries are insanity compared to what I think we used to work for. So now it might be our kids who are looking at those kinds of numbers, but it's kind of nutty what Ajeet is probably paying a summer intern, or Anil is paying a summer intern right now. So two questions for the panel. One is, when's it going to end? Anytime soon. And the second is, how does it compare to the market and the opportunity space in India?
You mean the valuations?
Yeah, I mean, if you could deploy, if you were thinking simply about the return on your investable capital in the startup sector, and you could deploy it at will across the two geographies, which of them is more overheated? Which of them has, better sort of near term, as in the investment cycle of startup capital? Which of them has better near term returns? Which market are you more bullish on in the future that you can foresee?
I think 2 points I want to make. One is, some of us have seen this kind of a hype back in the dot-com boom days. Exactly same kind of scenario, right? Difficult to hire the talent, valuations are high, lots of money floating around, and the correction that essentially happened was the stock market crash, the dot-com market crash. Now, all of that, they kind of brought the whole market back to the ground level, and everything actually came down, and during the process, lot of seed investors, angel investors. In fact, there was a joke at that time. All the angels went to heaven, right? So all the angel investors vanished, the seed investors vanished, and many of the venture capitalists, actually, I don't have the exact number, but lots of them who were founded during that 98, 99 timeframe, lots of them went out of business. Right, because they could not come back and raise their next round of funding. So is the scenario same today? Probably not, because I think it seems like it's a lot more real today, with real revenues and real growth, real customers. So the activities is a lot more real compared to the 2000. But having said that, we are matured enough to see that, at least I've seen since 1982, 4 or 5 cycles of ups and downs. And I think it's almost imminent in the next 6 months to 1 year, some sort of a correction to happen.
Okay, Anil?
Yeah, I think, the boom bust cycle is sort of a given, I guess, in the space that we are in. And I think we are seeing right now probably somewhere close to the peak in terms of where we are with respect to both the money going into startups, as well as in terms of the cost of hiring talent. There's also the other side. I think the markets are, the markets are what they are, right? I think you are seeing a lot more talent, for example, coming into, more people are taking computer science, both here in the US as well as in India. So you're seeing more people graduating with degrees in the field that there is a talent shortage. Data science, you're seeing more universities are opening up machine learning and AI related courses. So you'll see more talent coming in that space as well. So I think it's just a matter of time that I feel that the forces that are at play will adjust themselves, and you'll see some normalization. So I think these cycles are natural in terms of the industry that we are playing in, and I wouldn't read too much into it.
All right, let me become the optimist for a moment, and then ask you a different question, which maybe we'll put to Ajeet, which is, there's one thing we do understand, which is that if there's any truth whatsoever to how we think about valuation, valuations in high growth companies, that is tech companies, are very interest rate sensitive. When interest rates go up, near-term profits are much more valuable than long-term profits that are far down the road in any kind of valuation model. So we do understand that. Absent massive hike in interest rates, let me be an optimist and say, well, what has changed is this is nothing like the year 2000 and the year 1999, because almost all of the unicorn equivalents at that time were e-commerce companies. And if we think about what's going on right now, we have vehicular autonomy, we have everything around artificial intelligence, we have fintech and crypto, we have the cloud, we have SaaS, we have fundamental transformations in the life sciences and the convergence of data in the life sciences. We have amazing AI companies that are looking at and analyzing data in ways with insights in ways that are so profoundly different than anything we've seen in the past. We have robotics, we have the Internet of Things, we have sensors everywhere. We have everything happening on 37 different pillars, depending on how you count versus one. So Ajeet, as you think about your company now, and you've been involved in highly valued companies in the past, all of you have, is the valuation justified, and is it fundamental?
Yeah, so let me just think for a second. So the question we are asking is, are the valuations we are seeing right now are justified? And it's very hard to answer that question with a very broad brush. I would say that in general, maybe the market is 20% higher than what it would be if the overall thing was more sane. But what is important is there is a lot of variation when you look at individual companies. And I think there is, as you said, there is a lot more real problems the people are trying to solve, and the means to solve those problems have become more powerful. So we are all building tools, but the tools we use to build these tools are a lot more powerful. So I do think that the value creation that is happening right now and the range of areas in which innovation is happening, it's much broad than the year 2000. I used to be at I2 Technologies at the time. I was a kid out of school at the time, and the company was at some point worth $40 to $50 billion, and next day it was trading on pink sheets. You know, it couldn't even stay on the stock market. So I do think that the innovation happening today is a lot more real. And valuations, are they justified? I think by and large, they are still okay. They are not crazy. And if you look at the number of IPOs that have happened in the last 3 years, it's not a very huge amount. So there is, given the amount of innovation that has happened, given the number of sectors in which things are going on, there is a lot of bulking up in the private markets that's going on, and I do think that there is real stuff out there.
So Anil, maybe if you could jump in now, you've looked at this, if you put your hat on as the CTO of Adobe, you guys have been fairly active in the acquisition markets for early stage companies, and I'm sure you look at a tremendous amount more than actually hits the deal log. So as you've been looking at deals, do you find sort of the ratio of price to fundamental value to be there, or does it all look just overinflated to you?
I think in the private markets, we are seeing much higher expectations of valuations than in the publicly traded companies, for sure. I think there is definitely a higher valuations that people are associating with private companies who are playing in a space where they think there is big potential for growth, right? I think that I think is something which maybe the VCs have learned over several years to not underestimate the potential of certain technologies transforming industries and transforming the whole powered law, where you can have companies start small and not have much revenue, but through sheer the power law grow into behemoths that you will have to later on take on and compete. I think that realization is definitely very strong in the venture capital world. But when companies like Adobe acquire, I mean, we have to tie it to our fundamentals, and we have to tie it to actual revenue multiples that we can justify
sense.
in the context of the acquisition. So, and the revenue multiples have gone up. Even for Adobe itself, its stock price is now at a much higher multiple to its sales than it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So in that sense, I think there is willingness to pay that higher multiple, but it has to be still in the context of what we can afford. So,
at a macro level, if you look at all the success of technology so far, has been in data-intensive industries, which is media, which is e-commerce, those kind of things. The real hard physical industries are only now beginning to be touched by technology. So this is like automobile, this is like construction, shipping. Those are the things which are bulk of the economy. Now, they are getting, now that the sensors and therefore software and therefore management is only now getting into it. So vast new areas you see of economy are now opening up to technology. And I think that kind of optimism is reflected, you see, in higher PE ratios, you see, for successful technology companies.
Okay, so I'm going to just take and I'm sorry for the scattered conversation. I'm going to ask you each a specific question, the whole panel, and then let's start to open it up to some questions from the audience. So the specific question, I'm going to ask you two, and just a real quick, what's your view and what's your color? I'm going to give you $200 million to invest in the early stage, that's seed and A. Are you going to deploy the capital in Silicon Valley or in India, and why? And then I'm going to give you $5 billion to deploy at the later stage, which is confusing these days because we've looked at Bs that are multi-billion-dollar valuations, but let's call that the E, F, and G round. Are you going to deploy the capital in Silicon Valley or India, and why? So not long answers because I want to leave some time for the audience. I'm sure they have a lot of questions for you, but BV, start with you. Early stage capital, India or Silicon Valley?
That's a very, very good question. So given the type of companies that I'm interested in investing, mainly because I always invest in companies where I can add value, which is primarily centered around enterprise companies versus consumer companies. This is my personal experience of investing in India. The markets for the Indian enterprise companies is still not there to the extent that I would like to see, because I think the customers are, especially the early stage customers that you want to see, are not there yet to adapt to these enterprise. So which means I have to build a company in India, and very quickly I have to figure out how to move those companies to global markets, which basically means I have to bring them here. So given that, I would actually put 80% of my money in Silicon Valley and 20% of that in India.
Okay.
I think I couldn't articulate it better than him. I'm also a B2B investor, not a B2C investor. And the ecosystem, especially the ecosystem of customers and partners that exists here, doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So this thing would be, right now it would be 100% here. But if you give me growth capital, I'll invest most of it in India.
Okay, so your answer is seed here and growth in India, and that's just because you're much more optimistic about the near-term growth rate of the Indian markets.
Because early stage requires a lot of hand-holding of entrepreneurs and adding value to them. And that's my skill set. I can't do that remotely, sitting here, to help Indian entrepreneurs.
I see. Okay.
But late stage investing is about numbers and macro factors. And those look great for India.
Yeah, I'm not an expert investor, so I'll probably not feel comfortable taking so much money from you to invest. But I'd say, wherever I find great people, I'll invest. Early stage investing is you can have all the theories, but ultimately it does come down to betting on people. There's nothing else to go by, because ideas change, markets in which they operate change, all of those things change. And if you have, so it depends on where you have a strong network. If you have a strong network and you have access to the greatest talent here, I would invest it here. If you have access to great talent in India, I would invest there. When it comes to late stage investing, again, not an expert, but I was, as we can see, 9 of the world's top 20 tech companies are Chinese companies. And I don't think we would have predicted that just even 7, 8 years ago. There is so much that has gone on. So if the infrastructure in India, I think there is a little bit more maturity that needs to occur there. But at some point, it'll be really ready for growth stage investing in a massive way.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Venk said. Actually, I mean, I'm a technologist, so I like to invest in innovation and technology. So early stage, my preference is definitely for working with companies in Silicon Valley who are on the cutting edge of technology, doing things which are sort of in a market that is not yet defined and very innovative in terms of what they're bringing to market, right? But I agree that in the later stage, there is a big opportunity in India where if there is a product market fit which has been proven in US or in China, you just have to throw a lot of money at it in India and make it work at scale. You get the benefits of being the first there. You get the benefits of scaling it to a very large market very quickly, and all the network effects and monopolies that result as a result of that. So later stage, it makes sense to invest bigger in companies which have already shown that ambition and that drive to make it successful in that market.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me, before we move to refreshments, open up the floor to you for any questions you have for the panelists. Front row, please.
So I could just speak. So, Naresh. So my question is to Venktesh about Startup India policy. Is there anything in that policy that you would change looking back?
Absolutely. And I fought hard on that. One of the things that they have included is income tax exemption to startup for the first 3 years, which is a completely brain-dead approach.
That's being changed, by the way. It's being changed.
It's being changed, well, yeah. Angel investing was another one. So both Mohan is here and I fought on this as we met the Prime Minister, and finally, finally something has happened there, not 100%, but they have made some progress. So the problem is that, even if there is a political will at a higher level, by the time the bureaucracy gets involved, they really have no skin in the game. They've never created a single job in their life. They don't know how a business operates, and they are the ones who devise all the rules. And so it's like you think, you see, you have that you have won, that political leadership is convinced, and then the regulations come, and then the fight starts all over again. Luckily, this thing is moving in the right direction.
Yeah, but one question I want to ask, related to the same thing is, for individual investors, the tax that you are imposed on your capital gains, right, on the companies that you invest where the companies succeed and the gains you make, seems to me that is not well thought out, because you pay the taxes there and I really cannot get the tax write-off completely in the US.
I don't know. I think Mohan should be able to answer that. He deals with this issue. I'm not a tax expert.
Well, we'll leave that one for after. We don't want to go on video with tax advice.
Did I answer your question, though? Yes, sir. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, more questions. Yes, please.
Since over the last 3 years, there have not been very many IPOs. That means a lot of VC money is tied up in the startups. So the VCs do not have all the cash they were expecting to reinvest. So is that true? And secondly,
Is that in India or here?
Here in the US, no IPOs in the last. You can count the number of IPOs that have been there. Secondly, because of the lack of IPOs, there have been more corporate acquisitions, companies acquiring other companies if they see the synergy. So that brings me to a couple of questions. First of all, how is, because they have not freed up their cash, how is going to impacting now and in the future, the reinvestment of that money that the partners and limited partners are tied up. Secondly, the companies that are being acquired, these acquiring companies are giving huge valuations. How is the acquisition and merger of these companies impacting the growth of these companies, acquiring companies? And actually, there is a third thing that's happening.
Well, let's maybe just handle these one at a time.
I can take the last question.
Yeah.
I can just give an example of my own company.
Yeah, and because I see that when these companies get acquired with huge valuation, I do not see the combined results really having the same impact on the company. Okay, again, I'm not trying to answer that question, but I'd like to get your opinion.
Yeah.
And thirdly, I'm seeing because of the lack of the free money.
Just take one question.
Yeah, we'll just do one question from each person. So,
I think this making an acquisition successful within a larger organization, that's an art by itself. And I think if it is not done properly right from day one, where there is a good chemistry between the acquirer and the acquiree, I think you might just forget it. So it's very, very important to make sure that the core team, including perhaps maybe even the founding team, continues to be actively engaged post-acquisition. If that doesn't happen, it's going to be very hard. So I've seen a lot of times acquisition happens, then founder is out next day, right? Pretty much the founder is the one who knows the entire chemistry of the organization and the pulse of the organization. And if that person is not there, how do you expect in the event of challenges, right? How do you expect you to have a champion? So I'll give you, when Netscaler got acquired by Citrix, right? The chemistry that was built between us and them was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, first of all, I was very particular that this acquisition is not from a financial gain perspective only. This acquisition, I was more interested to make sure the product that we had built has the ability to reach broader market. And that was put on the table day one. So in fact, I asked this question to the CEO, and the CEO had to go back with his team to come and present how he's going to structure the sales and marketing, the go-to-market aspect of it, to take our product to fit that into their sales machine. And the result today, right, when the acquisition happened, we were about $60, $70 million revenue. Today, Netscaler not only is the backbone of Citrix, but it's almost like $1 billion plus in revenue. So, having said that, I've also seen lots of other companies actually failing, but I believe there's chemistry working out between the two companies right from day one is very important.
So Anil, maybe I'll call you out on this. I first award you a trophy for being a founder who has the longest tenure at an acquirer of anybody I know. And second, say, now that you're in that role, the CTO's organization probably gets deeply involved in integration activities, and you have done some deals. So do you feel like, in general, with a little bit of hindsight on Adobe's deals, that they tend to be well done and they work, or not so much?
Yeah, no, I think Adobe is... Adobe has built a lot of its business by acquiring companies, integrating them, and making them work, right? I think they have, as you said, it's an art. The cultural fit is a very critical piece. The other thing which Adobe has done well is that they give free rein to the acquired companies in terms of running their business, and the rest of the Adobe organization actually tries to learn from the acquired company, which is very different. Adobe doesn't come in with the mindset that we know best how to do your business, and they give a lot of freedom to the acquired company to both figure out how to fit into the Adobe organization, as well as the Adobe organization tries to learn from the acquired company, which makes a big difference in terms of how people in the acquired company feel as well as figuring out the growth potential for the overall business.
Great. Additional questions? Yes. Light shirt.
Always fascinating to hear from the folks that I've heard them speak in the past, but unlimited funds available, what part of India would you invest in? What industry of India would you invest in? Did you guys know?
Yeah, unlimited funds. Question on the floor is, if you had unlimited capital to invest in India, what sector would you invest in? If you choose a single sector.
While you're thinking, I'll give the answer. My answer. So, I will invest in sports. I'm a huge fan of sports, and growing up, I saw India not doing very well in sports, and now they are, so I'd love to invest in sports so we can do better in Olympics and Asia.
I would invest in India in entertainment. I think that's a big business, given the nature of the people. I mean, I won't do consumer, but I think an entertainment like a B2B2C kind of a thing could be very promising.
If I have to choose one, I will choose healthcare. I think India is completely underinvested from a healthcare standpoint, and is going to go through, see a dramatic change very, very shortly. That's where I'll put my money.
Yeah, I think the big thing India needs right now is infrastructure. And if there was an easy way to build a startup in the infrastructure space, I guess that would be the place where you would invest. But I guess it's a government thing more than a startup thing.
Okay, purple shirt.
It's my impression that acquisitions generally result in a diminishment of jobs. I'm wondering, can you tell us what percentage of M&As result in job growth?
It's for you. You're the research guy.
Yeah.
And you can too, Toby.
Well, so acquisitions are a complicated subject. There are many kinds of deals. The typical large company deal is driven by boards of public companies to approve large company deals, typically look for cost savings, and one form of cost savings are employment cuts. So if you look at the history of large companies merging with large companies, there tends to be a net employment reduction over some time horizon.
In mature industries.
When mature large companies. When high growth tech companies acquire early stage venture-backed companies, generally speaking, there's no cost synergy play in the strategic logic for those deals. And there's a plan to allocate some of the corporate balance sheet to invest in the business, the sector areas in which acquisitions are done, and there's a hope to retain and build on acquired teams. So there's not a general answer, I don't think, on the record of M&A, but there is a sort of sector by sector distinction in the kinds of deals that these folks have been involved in, as you've heard BV's story, and I think Ajeet's stories and Anil's stories. These companies have, when they're acquired, they generally receive investment capital and experience employment growth.
Yeah, no, I agree. Maybe in mature industries, it's more about cutting jobs, but at least in technology and growth areas, like Adobe never cuts people when they hire or when they acquire a company. It's more about how to grow the business and create more jobs as a result of growth rather than cost synergy that the acquisitions are made. So I think the key thing is that with the acquiring company, when it acquires for growth, you'll see that they have a plan in terms of how to drive synergies so that the whole business grows rather than you cut people and just take the cost part of the equation out. So you're always trying to grow the top line rather than improve the bottom line by cutting costs.
So maybe one final question, if there is one. Yes, the green shirt, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm wondering about what we can do to promote the ecosystem so India can produce more unicorns.
India can produce more?
More unicorns.
More unicorns.
So what's one institutional change? I think by ecosystem you mean the institutional environment or something of that nature?
Thanks for asking. So Venk mentioned Startup Bridge India, which BV and Venk were part of putting together initially and supporting. And we're here to catalyze $100 billion in partnerships between Indian enterprises and global corporations, because one of the issues they have when coming to the United States and trying to scale their market is customer acquisition and partnerships. And I'm wondering, I'm hearing a lot of other organizations and other types of activities to try to promote the development of an ecosystem to promote the ability, to create the ability for more Indian unicorns.
Yeah. Let me first take a cut, and maybe you should expand on that, given the fact that we did this billion-dollar babies.
And we are down to 3 minutes.
I've been involved with a bunch of these unicorn companies, and if I see a pattern, basically it comes down to a few things. Number one is telling the story in the most simplistic manner. Meaning, if an entrepreneur tells a story, I should be able to get that story in less than 30 seconds. And the market, not the entrepreneur, but me as an investor, venture capitalist, I should be able to actually visualize how big that market is, right? And then comes the execution aspect of it. I think these are the three put together in some combination, typically results in these unicorns. And when I say unicorn, it's not a billion-dollar value, it is more billion-dollar revenues, right? So you have to actually see, is the market big enough to eventually produce $1 billion in revenue? Now, having said that, enterprise companies, again, I'm going to repeat this again, enterprise companies, I don't see in India, for the Indian market, to create these unicorns. But I think consumer companies in India can definitely create multiple billion-dollar, as you heard since morning, right, with the 900 million cell phones proliferation all over India, and this whole digitization, all of that is happening. I think there's plenty of opportunities to bring valuable content to the end users and monetize that, right? And we have already seen Flipkart, and then this Swiggy is another company, which is kind of like a DoorDash in India, and that's $1 billion plus valuation in India as well. So I think if we can extrapolate from that, consumer-centric companies in India, you have the potential. But enterprise companies, if we tap into these three things that I said, have the initial validation in India and then bring them into Silicon Valley and turn them into unicorn sort of companies.
So I think that actually is time.